About 6, 8 years ago, our students were coming in, more and more of them interested in video. And I thought, well, we got to learn how to write, folks. Video is nice. And more students are moving into video. And then I began to kind of open my eyes and see, wait a minute, they're seeing more and more video. It's more pervasive. How are you using video in your areas, and has it evolved? Or talk a little bit about the future of video in your specific areas, how you're incorporating them, how you're using them, or are these students just playing around with equipment? How are you incorporating video? Les?
It's a great point, and I'll just use a practical example, so kind of the storytelling mode of making the point. We were at a senior course, an executive level course, and they brought in a guest speaker. And this person was a Pulitzer Prize journalist. If I said his name and paper, you would recognize him right away. And he got up and talked to all these executives about how the information domain, communication, had changed. And so even as a journalist, and he was a good one clearly, that the business model had changed to require pictures, images, video footage. It's no longer the day where you can just put out a news release and expect to get results. You've got to make it interesting. You have to draw people's attention. How do you reach your audience? And so that's become much more challenging because there's so many channels out there, so much information. How do you sort through all the stuff that's out there and make your company, your brand, your name stand out? And so it is through images, strong words. The fundamentals still apply, Dale. If you have to be a good writer. But all the other tools come into play as well.
I'll build on that and say that you have to be a good photographer too. Anybody can take a bad picture. Turn on your cell phone and you can see evidence of that. Somebody wanted to argue with me a few weeks ago that photography is dead because now everybody's a photographer. That's not true. Everybody's a bad photographer. My company, and I'm fighting with some people, I'm working on a very big project in Maryland right now, and they want something for nothing. They want for cheap. And can't we just take videos? Well, video is going to cost you some big money. You want to do this at a lower budget. Yeah, but can't we just shoot this on our phones? You guys understand, no, we can't shoot this on our phones. Not if we're going to put my brand on it or put it on the Air Force website. Yeah, you can put it on your Facebook page, but that's not the same thing. So you have to be a good writer, you have to be a good photographer, and then you have to be a good salesperson because you have to convince whoever you're working for that there really is a difference between an Emmy-winning photographer and my niece and her cell phone.
Let me do a follow-up there. We're fighting kind of an uphill battle with our students, or they're here, because they're used to the images, audio, and lighting. We try to get them to change.
Yeah, I think it is.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't say...
It's not a phone if you can't hang up.
I didn't...
Silent click, you're out of here. Yeah.
I didn't say you had to have an expensive camera.
Mm-hmm. But
you have to be a good photographer, or you have to be a good producer. You can take excellent photographs with the phones you're sitting on. You just have to know how to do it and know how to use them.
Yep. No lighting. Know what that backlighting's doing to you.
Dale,
Yep. Composition.
does that phone take pictures?
I think it gets Morse code, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Only black and white.
Yeah, just like yeah. And after all, that's all we need anyway. That's basic. Yeah, that's the way pictures should be. Liz, what are you all doing in your company?
I'll tell you, when I started at GoDaddy in 2005, and there had been 9 PR people before me who didn't last very long, so I was kind of dead woman walking, and I didn't know why for a while. But I realized that the company didn't really understand what PR was necessarily doing. So what I did was went from a Excel spreadsheet that reported the weekly activity to what we called the PR video in a minute. And for 5 years, every Friday, we put out this video that became both entertaining and educational and informative about what we were doing. And it gave employees a sense of pride about what had happened that week, and it gave our executives real understanding and connection when they got that call to do a last-minute interview, for example, and then they see it and how it turns out and helps promote the company and protect the brand. It was very effective. So it was a way to kind of take those TV skills and have some fun with video. Really worked well.
Bo, what about you?
Well, video has always been essential, or imaging film has been essential to the advertising business. But what's exciting today is that it's gone beyond a 30-second or 60-second commercial, and that's the explosion of video and the way it's used and the aspects of how it can be used and the different elements of it have just provided so much more creative opportunity. But I do agree that there has to be some talent behind that camera. So learn those skills if you want to go into that field and be adept at it. But the explosion of video is exciting to our business.
Les, I want to come back and start with you in the area of sensitive material, particularly, well, you've worked with government agencies, and sometimes the government agency doesn't tell us all they know, and maybe even for good reason. But I want to start out with handling sensitive material, maybe material we may not even want to acknowledge, or material we really can't talk about yet because not enough has been done for us to be able to really discuss it. Les, how do you handle sensitive material, or in your case maybe even information, private information, or classified information?
I think, and I'm willing to bet all of us have experienced that, whether it's proprietary information, corporate secrets, developing new products, those kind of things that, until they launch the product, they don't want it out there, or whether it's classified or sensitive information in government. And so the important part to that is having a plan of how and when and what. And so, strategic communications is taking on, it's really exploding in terms of both terminology, confusion, but purpose. And so strategic communication would be, all right, what are we dealing with? What do we want to release? What could become public knowledge? And how do we handle all those? And you would work through the plan of whether it's a product launch or keeping something close hold, so you limit the number of people who have knowledge of it or work on it. You have securities and safeguards in place, but at some point, typically you'll want to share that with the public, especially if it's a product. I mean, if you look at how iPhone does it, how do they keep, the iPhone 6, and then is the first hint or leak of it on purpose, or did it really kind of leak out there? Was that a marketing scheme or what? But I would say probably most important is trust and your reputation. If you compromise that even once, you're done. So your boss needs to know that they can trust you to work on the most sensitive projects.
Liz, I'm going to ask you from two directions, being a news person for 12 years, I believe, 12 or 13, well, 18 years, oh my word. From your perspective, having to deal with people like Les that aren't going to tell you everything, well, maybe they can't. How do you deal with that then from your position now, having to protect the company or do what's in the best interest of the company? How do you reconcile those two values or those two thrusts of the communication business?
Well, I think, as you mentioned, there are times when there's a good reason to withhold information. And I like to think if I were a journalist and I went to Les and he had something that was dangerous to release, that he would at least tell us that. Because I think even the audience understands that. Do they believe it all the time? I don't know. Is it always true in that way? I'm not sure. But I know on the PR side, there are times when we can't tell a journalist about a customer because we have a real sense of respect for our customers' privacy. And so typically when you explain that, it's understood. And there is a lot of confidential information that comes with whether it's a product or a fun thing like what's the Super Bowl commercial this year, or actually working with governments on cases where they're requesting documents. So it's really a sensitive area right now, I think, out of the NSA stories and all of that, and something I think has a lot more interest than it used to have.
Gordon, I'm going to come to you next and ask kind of the same question. Bo, I want to come to you last on that one because we've got kind of a different perspective also from your standpoint. Gordon, what about this sensitive material?
When you're on this end, you only have two things, your Rolodex and your reputation. I've worked with journalists now for 20 years. Rick Villada, a alum I saw trolling around earlier, he and I have worked together for many years. As a reporter in DC I was having lunch with a few weeks ago who said, Gordon, you realize how long we've worked together? Because I worked with him on the front end of my career in DC. You have to control the information. You have to know what you can put out and what you can't put out. And never lie. Because the second you compromise your reputation, which is what that's going to do, they're never going to believe you again. And you have to have that. It might not always be easy, and it might not always make you popular, but it's what you have to do. You have to know, you have to stand on firm ground. Marlon Fitzwater was a presidential press secretary, and I remember reading his book, and he said about reporters, always treat them in a friendly way, but never treat them as your friends. You can have great relationships with reporters. You can have beers and pizza with reporters. But when it comes time for everybody to do their job, they're a reporter, they're not your friend. And you just need to know that in the back of your head, and they need to realize that at the same time.
Bo, in the advertising industry, you're kind of in a different place than some of these folks. But from your standpoint, how far do you go in exaggerating? How do I say that? Oh, I'm going to get myself in trouble again. How do you deal with this thing in the advertising business where you're always trying to make your your client look good? Where's that line where you're...
Well, I mean, this goes
good?
back to another personal philosophy I
Okay.
have, and it's, your circumstances are temporary, but your character lasts forever. So that's one lesson I can give today. That's what I'd say, and that applies to business. And it's all about your reputation. At the end of the day, that's what a person has and what a business has, and that is your most precious asset. So I don't think you can ever compromise yourself on that if you want to be in business for a long time and be respected and have repeat business. So it's honesty, never lie. I mean, you've heard all the lessons here, and they're very basic, but they're the truths. And what we value the very most, we value skills in the industry and abilities, but we really value good judgment. So that's hard to teach, I know, and a lot of people fail in that regard, but if you can display good judgment in your career and it's recognized as such, you're going to be very successful within your company and outside your company.
Do you have to spend any time with a client saying, I'm not sure we want to say this. I mean, this is almost an exaggeration. Talk about...
Yeah, I mean, they
having
look
work
to us
with
for
your
good
client.
counsel. I mean, the client of the day is the client, and they'll make the final call. If it's counter to our philosophy or our moral code, I mean, we'll step away from that situation. We've had that happen very rarely, although it does happen. So
You can't be shy
Yeah.
about being the one person in a room to stand up at the end of the meeting and say, does anybody else think this is a bad idea?
exactly. Yeah.
I was sitting in a room in Las Vegas a few years ago, at depths of the recession. The president had just made his remarks about Las Vegas. All the financial companies had canceled all of their convention business. People weren't coming, and suddenly everybody was excited because FEMA was going to have this big, huge, once every 3-year, 4-year test, and it was going to be in Las Vegas. And I got called late because they wanted the resort companies to take part in this. And I had everybody introduce themselves. There were 40, 50 people in the room. Everybody had letters after their name, working for the government. Hi, I'm MGM. And they said, we'll hear first from the scenario committee. This was the disaster that they were going to bring onto us. Okay, dirty bomb smuggled in through the port of Los Angeles, driven to Las Vegas, explodes, is detonated at the corner of Tropicana and Las Vegas Boulevard. Everybody within a quarter mile is going to be vaporized. Glass shards are going to be shot from any glass buildings for a half mile, and people will be cut. Everybody within 3/4 of a mile is going to die of radiation poisoning within 5 days. And I, right there, stopped this big, huge meeting, all kinds of money to fly these people in, and I said, does anybody else think this is a bad idea? Because we're going to vaporize Vegas. I mean, this is a Stephen King novel, and you're inviting media to cover this? Well, yeah, what's wrong with this? It could happen. Yeah, it could happen, but we don't need to broadcast the fact that it could happen and have meeting planners. So you have to be, I don't know where it's going with that. You have to be willing to stand up, thank you.
I want to just chime in, Dale. Gordon nailed it. As PR professionals, you need to think about things differently. The CFO thinks about the entire company. The chief operations officer is worried about equipment and training and operations. The financial officer is worried about the money. The lawyer is worried about the law. The PR professional needs to be the one in the room who has the courage to stand up and say, this is wrong, this doesn't feel right. I mean, you guys know when the spidey senses go off and the hair on the back of your neck stands up and you just kind of go, there's something about this. And good judgment is key. So for my business, there's physical courage, courage in combat, and then there's courage in business. And that's kind of what I took away from what Gordon just said.
Anybody remember New Coke?